What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of WagmiTV. The boys are back, and it's an exciting day, you know? Shanghai upgrade went as planned. Looks like it went super smooth. So definitely an exciting day in crypto. And today, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking to you guys about another exciting topic, one that's very topical right now, and that is CBDCs, which is central bank digital currencies. We're going to start in Europe, where we have some information, some new news on kind of what they're planning. And then we're going to come over across the pond here and kind of talk about a little bit about what's going on in the United States. But I think before we dive in, we really just want to discover and kind of talk about what a CBDC actually is. So, Mata, if you want to kick us off and just kind of give us a quick rundown on what CBDCs are.
Yeah, super quickly. So as I'm kind of referenced, CBDC, it stands for Central Bank Digital Currency. So it is a digital form of a nation's currency that is issued and regulated by a country's central bank. So what they'll tell you is the aim of CBDCs is to provide a more stable and more secure payment system, increase financial inclusion, and ultimately reduce the costs and risks associated with physical currencies, right? And so a lot of it kind of coincides with some of the things that we've been seeing in crypto over the last couple of years, right? And some of the problems they've been trying to solve. I think the biggest difference being, right, that centralized portion versus, you know, the blockchain technology and decentralization of the crypto market. So we kind of talk about this as something that's maybe a little bit against what crypto is kind of built for and the way that we've been approaching it to this point. And it's not something that's necessarily only going on in Europe or only going on in the United States. It's actually something that's pretty widespread. So yeah, I think you actually had a map that we wanted to quickly pull up here to kind of show the different countries that are actually looking into CBDCs, either implemented them, looking into them, or just doing research around them. You want to talk a little bit about this piece?
Yeah, absolutely. That was a great breakdown. So this website tracks 119 countries. And so out of those 119 countries, there's 18 that are piloting, 32 that are in actual active development of a CBDC, and 39 that are researching. And there's actually 11 that have launched their own CBDCs already. So we have, you know, countries like Nigeria, the Bahamas, Jamaica, countries like that have actually actively launched them. Whether they're being adopted or not, that's another question. But I think to Mata's point, it kind of flies under the radar that there's a lot of these major countries, you know, like Russia, for instance, that's in a pilot phase of a CBDC, you know, India that's in a pilot phase, Australia that's in a pilot phase. You know, a lot of the headlines tend to be around, you know, the US, UK, you know, Western countries. But this is a phenomena that's occurring across the entire globe. And so it's almost a wave of technology that seems at this point that would be pretty difficult to stop. You know, I think people have varying opinions about whether or not it's the way to go, but I think either way, it seems like this is kind of the direction that the world is going monetarily in terms of policy and the infrastructure to support central banks.
Yeah, and to kind of add to that from a scale perspective, right? It's 119 countries, but it's something like 90 to 95% of the world's GDP. Those are the countries that are looking into this. So very, very much widespread when it comes to kind of the thought process here.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, on that map, we saw a variety of those countries that are in development of a CBDC. One of those regions that really stood out was Europe. And that kind of brings us into the next part of what we're going to talk about, which is there was actually an interview with Christine Lagarde, who's the head of the European Central Bank. And this was just dropped here in the last week or so, where she actually goes into a fair amount of detail on what the European Union is planning on the side of CBDCs. In fact, they're actually planning a CBDC called the digital euro that they're actually planning to release later this year. Specifically, she actually talks about potentially launching it in October. Now, what's interesting about this is that she goes into what are the pros and cons, and one of the things she doesn't shy away from is the fact that it will be a good amount of surveillance, right? And so she basically sells it as this surveillance is necessary in order to protect the national security interests of the European Union. Now, obviously there's a debate to be had if that's a justifiable cause, but definitely something that we thought stood out in the news this past week. So curious to get your guys' thoughts on what you guys think of these developments.
I think the big thing is these are always done in the name of national security, right? Things like this where they try to kind of grasp at a little bit more control. So you never know the direction that these things are going or what agendas are really behind them. But, something like this, it's like kind of technologically speaking, something that's going to push everything forward. You never know what's going to happen from an agenda perspective when people get their hands on something like this.
Yeah, and I think it's something where, in the past probably 6 months, we've seen major currencies around the world feel like, they could be used instead of the US dollar in certain transactions. When you look at relationships between Russia, China, Iran, Saudi Arabia, it's something where countries are trying to find new ways to use their currency, create like greater power from their currency, really weaponizing it. And this is something where it feels like, maybe they're not fully switching the entire currency to digital, but just to be able to take that step to, like you're saying, Mata, in a national security sense, be able to utilize it more and spread kind of their arms. I think it's a big development and something that people should watch out for. I think the big question here is how much control do they have? Can they stop you from making certain purchases or transacting with certain people? I think there's a lot of questions around that.
Or put an expiration date on it, similar to what they did with the digital yuan to kind of get people to start spending money and get the economy rolling again.
What's crazy is, in the world of programmable money, really anything you're talking about is theoretically possible. In the interview itself, which we'll link down below in the description if anybody's curious, and it's only a small portion of the interview that I was able to listen to, but she says certain things about specific dollar amounts. For example, like surveillance and being able to see every transaction that anybody makes over, let's say, 400 euros or something. I think that's what the dollar figure that she references in the video. So, basically in the world of programmable money, they can do whatever they want. And the question is, should a centralized entity be the arbitrator of what's possible and what should be done, what can be done? That kind of, I think, leads us, we can take a trip over to, our homeland to kind of explore what's going on in the United States and how these things all kind of fit together.
Yeah, and so I think what you're referring to is kind of this FedNow piece. So it's not necessarily a CBDC yet, but we kind of have been looking at this as maybe like a stepping stone. We're pushing the stone down the hill, and this is kind of that first step, and then it's going to get some speed and eventually turn into something that could be like a CBDC, right? So just to take a step back, and then I'll pass it over to you guys. But FedNow, for those that don't know, is essentially a real-time payment system that's being developed by the Federal Reserve in the U.S. So it's designed to provide consumers and businesses with essentially a faster and more secure way to make payments. And so with FedNow, payments can be processed and settled in real time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, including weekends and holidays, right? So this will allow individuals and businesses to receive funds instantly rather than having to wait hours, days, etc., for transactions to actually be processed. So that's kind of what we're going to start to be referring to now. And I believe, if I'm correct, they said they're trying to launch in April. Is that correct, or am I off on that?
I think they gave a window. I think it was like April to July or something.
To July.
Yeah, they have like a little bit of a window, but I think going back to, Mata, you made a good point about it being a potential stepping stone to a CBDC. It's not a CBDC yet. And Ev made a good point about how, what are our thoughts around what's going to be controlled. And I think that this is where the impact on the crypto market comes in, because it all depends on what people actually believe and what people think. And so if they actually think that their money is going to be in jeopardy in terms of the ability to spend it freely, I think that turns into somewhat of it leans into the bullish case for Bitcoin, where it's like Bitcoin's all about ownership of your own money. It's all about being separated from any centralized entity. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how this impacts the crypto markets, and if it leads to more regulation of crypto markets, because now, I mean, basically once it goes to a CBDC, a lot of these countries are going to be directly competing with cryptocurrencies, where before, they kind of sat side by side. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
I think the big counter to that is whether they allow you to even buy cryptocurrency, like on and off ramps. Because that's the biggest thing is, you could buy it, sure, but if they don't allow you to off ramp or like really even transact with it, how useful could it really be? So I think there's bearish and bullish sentiment to that. But yeah, I think I cut you off there, Sia.
No, that was a good point.
I think that's a really good point. And bringing up the on and off ramp conversation is exactly the direction where I was taking this. Where like, if you just saw FedNow just by itself without any other context, it's easy to be like, okay, they're not necessarily trying to battle crypto. Maybe it's not related to crypto, but you take it into the context of everything else that the government is doing, and it's really hard to say that this isn't related in some way, shape, or form. In the last few weeks, we've seen multiple like high-profile, huge lawsuits brought against big crypto companies, specifically targeting the on and off ramps, Evan, that you were talking about. So in that context, the simultaneous effort to choke basically the on and off ramps, squeeze them potentially out of business or make them less relevant, and two, to create your own kind of alternative to this crypto world, you can kind of see how the power dynamic is shifting. I think they're smart enough to realize that this digitization and blockchain technology and digital currency is kind of the future, and it's really a question of like, how do we get the most control over it now before it really takes off? And that's where I kind of like, at least that's like my gut reaction to kind of everything that I'm seeing happen over these last few months. Curious to get your guys' opinion on it.
Yeah, I think those are interesting points. There's a lot of advantages to having, digital dollars, but I think something we've also seen in crypto is the speed at which prices can change and outflows can happen. And I wonder, when it comes to these centralized, currencies, how they would react to, bank runs on a weekend. That's a totally different scenario than you've seen in U.S. history for, the last 100 years. And so I think it would significantly switch up, possibly consumer behavior, bank behavior, how we transact. It's interesting that Euro or the European Union's going so quickly or moving so quickly, because it does feel like there's a lot of risk with this. So yeah, I don't know. I kind of feel like it's a little scary with how fast some of these programs are moving.
I think it's the other piece that I'm kind of curious to see how it plays out, because it seems like, to your point, Ev, a lot of this is coming, it seems like out of nowhere. I mean, we've kind of heard whispers about it in the last year or so, and XRP has been all about CBDCs for a while, but it seems like it's coming so fast that it's, how are they going to be able to develop the infrastructure? How are they going to be able to support it? What's the strategy behind it? And then have they even thought about the longer term effects, like you said, of having 24/7 banking, because they can't just prepare and write balance sheets. Fractional reserve banking is going to be, come into play there as well. Like, if everything is instantaneous, you almost can't, it's going to be a lot harder to do fractional reserve banking and things like this, where all these, strategies that banks and countries have been putting into play. But I think that it's going to be interesting to see what the larger effects of it are. Interesting.
Definitely, a lot going on. And as you guys kind of alluded to, just moving at light speed here, it feels like. I think it's definitely, it's going to remain kind of top of mind, top of news cycle, I think, here, especially this year, with these seemingly big catalysts for the government launching various programs, whether it's here or abroad. I think those are pretty big catalysts that we'll definitely be keeping an eye on and keeping everyone informed on. So I think that's what we got for this week. CBDCs in the book. We'll be keeping a pulse on it. But till next time, thanks for tuning in. If you found anything useful, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below. And we'll see you next week here on WagmiTV.